Mt Whitney is the highest mountain in the contiguous US at just over 14,500 feet. It's also seriously one of the most beautiful hikes you can do here in America. Last July, my friends and I hiked to the summit, and we were only able to make it because we did a lot of preparing for this. But we noticed along the way that a lot of people on that mountain were underprepared, so that kind of inspired us to make this video. Before we dive in, I want to stress that everyone's experience may vary depending on the time of year and the weather conditions. We summited over the course of 3 nights and 4 days in mid-July after a particularly bad winter. This video is not an end-all be-all, so be sure to do your own research and consult other sources. Everything we're about to say are things that I've noticed in my planning, things that we noticed on the trail. We've tried to break it down in a way that's best for you. So without further ado, this is how we plan for Mt. Whitney. So you're not even going to be able to make it on the mountain unless you have one of two things: a Whitney Zone permit or a permit to go on the John Muir Trail. And honestly, if you are going through the John Muir Trail, this video is not for you. This is mostly for people who are just trying to get to the top of Mt. Whitney as a single trip. So let's talk about the Whitney Zone permit application system. So you have to go to recreation.gov and you'll have to fill out an application there. You're gonna have to choose the dates that work best for you. Now, you have the option to put in backup dates, and I highly recommend you do that because there's a good chance your first picks aren't gonna necessarily happen, especially if it's a weekday. Last year, of the 15,000 permits, only 15% of overnight permits were actually accepted, while 20% of day hikes were accepted. So this is honestly going to be the toughest part for you, is getting that permit. Before you can even get the permit, you have to ask yourself a question. Do you want to backpack overnight to the top, or are you going to try and do it in a single day? Now, it is possible to do it in a single day. It's just very hard, and you're probably going to have to start at midnight to 2 a.m. Most people recommend backpacking for one night, getting up to trail camp, camping, and then getting an early rise to the summit the next day and coming down that same day. If you are lucky enough to get that permit, you have to make sure you pick up the permit at the right area. You're gonna have to go to the Eastern Sierra Interagency Visitor Center near the town of Lone Pine to pick that up. They'll get you all sorted through. You can ask about the conditions, and it's really a great resource to stop at before you make your drive up to the Whitney portal.
One of the most important things when you're preparing to climb Mount Whitney is to make sure you're in good enough shape to do it. It's a good idea to start your exercise routine about 3 months before your hike, with more intense training about 1 month out from it. The main thing you're going to want to focus on is cardio. About 3 months out, I was jogging about 2 miles a day, 4 to 5 times a week, at a pace of about 6 to 7 miles per hour. A month out from the trip, I started incorporating anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes of Stairmaster in addition to the 2 miles I was jogging. And I did this about 2 times a week. In lieu of that, you can also do inclined walking on a treadmill at about 3.5 miles per hour. You should go at a pace that you can handle, but also you should try and push yourself and increase the pace as you get better. You can also do intervals of intense and easy Stairmaster. So in addition to cardio, I also did leg exercises, mostly leg presses. I basically had 1 day dedicated to leg exercise about once a week. Now, leg presses, I think, prepare you more for being able to hike with a heavy pack. Exercising your legs is also going to be good for certain parts of the trail where it's kind of rough and there's rocky terrain and you kind of have to use your muscles to navigate all the weird, uneven ground. But again, cardio is what you're going to want to focus on most. Now, with any weight training, you want to make sure you have some rest days and that you're eating protein so that your muscle can actually build. And you also want to make sure that you're pushing yourself and increasing the amounts of weights you're doing. It also might be a good idea to take a break from weight training, maybe a week out from the hike, just to prevent any muscle soreness or any sort of pulled muscles or any problems like that. Some things to keep in mind while you're training is that you can see cardio improvement in as little as 1 to 2 weeks. Of course, you should be working on your cardio much more than that, but with muscle training, on the other hand, it can take up to 4 weeks, if not longer, to see any sort of improvement. But whether we're talking about cardio or muscle strength, you are going to want to gradually increase the intensity of your workouts as you go on, because that's the only way that your body will actually improve. It's not going to make your muscles bigger or your heart stronger if you're only doing the same amount that you've always been doing. Keep in mind that how rigorous your exercise routine is will depend on your fitness level to begin with. If you're starting from a point that's a little less in shape, you might want to have a more rigorous routine. A lot of the benefits of a workout routine will be psychological. So basically, when you're on that Stairmaster, you're also getting used to the psychological burden of hiking uphill for an extended period of time. Finally, keep in mind that altitude is also a factor that you might not be able to account for depending on where you are. To deal with this, we spread our hike out over the course of several nights. So we started in Lone Pine, which was about 3,000 feet, and then then we camped at a campsite that was about 10,000 feet or so, and so on and so on. You can also camp at the Horseshoe Meadow Campground, which is at about 10,000 feet in elevation and is reachable by car from Lone Pine.
Now, if you're lucky and you happen to live in a place with mountains, that's going to be your ticket. I live in Los Angeles and I have a great range of mountains to hike on a weekly basis. I recommend doing 10-mile hikes. Mount Baldy, Mount Cucamonga, San Gorgonio, San Jacinto, all those are great places to start. What's really important though is you start practicing your elevation gain. All of those have about over 4,000 feet elevation gain, so you'll be starting to kind of get yourself acclimated a little bit to those higher altitudes. When it comes to the conditions of Mt Whitney, you have to understand Mt Whitney is a beast of its own right. By the time you get the permit in mid-April, you should already know if it's a bad winter or a good winter. And when I say bad winter, I mean a heavy snowfall, record-breaking numbers, or if it's a good winter, it is a light snowfall. If you have a good winter, most of the snowpack and the snowfield should clear up by mid-June, sometime early July. If you are experiencing a bad winter like it was for us, those snowfields could last well into July and even into August. When you have a bad winter, you're gonna have to make some adjustments to your plans. You're gonna have to bring additional gear, you're gonna have to come up with some extra contingency plans, and you're gonna have to adjust the course of your training. There are some great resources to go online to see what the conditions are. My personal favorite is the Whitney Zone Forum. There are a lot of locals who live nearby that update the status and provide trail reports on a regular basis. They're a great resource. You can ask them questions, you can read other people's comments. Really, if you get a chance, check it out, take their advice, and that is probably your best place to start. Outside of the wintertime and the margin between summer where you might have that snowfall, your other biggest hazard when it comes to conditions is going to be thunderstorms. Once you break the tree line and you're up near a trail camp, if a thunderstorm rolls in, you have no place to go. And if you are prepared and you have hiking poles, you're basically a walking target for lightning. A lot of people underestimate this and it becomes incredibly dangerous. The National Park Service will tell you to get off the mountain and go below the tree line if this happens, and I can't stress how important that is. You are incredibly exposed up there, and you are really one of the only things that can hit. You really shouldn't be going up Mt Whitney unless you know exactly what you're going to be seeing along the way. That means you have a good sense of what the milestones are, what the markers are, what the campsites, lakes, all those that you'll be passing. And if you don't, I really recommend memorizing those and knowing what to expect along the way. For the most part in the summertime, you're not going to have a problem finding the trail. Where this gets a little dicey though is when you add snow into the equation. If you watched our video, you'll know that one of the parties that we met up with lost the trail early in the morning when it was dark because the snow covered the trail up towards Trail Crest. And even for us, we lost the trail for a moment when we encountered our first snow field. What we didn't show you were the other parties of hikers that were either lost, took the snowfield too far, had to come down for medical emergencies, or lost part of their group members. And I can't stress this enough, this hike is not for everyone. It should not be taken lightly, and you should know what to expect when you start this hike. So here's a list of tips just to kind of keep in mind before you start hiking. First off, you're going to need a map, and you're going to need to know how to use it. You want to make sure you know the major campsites, the major trail markers all along the way, because it is absolutely critical you don't get lost. Don't cross snowfields unless it's absolutely necessary. For us, in our case, the trail was completely blocked up ahead, so we did have to take a snowfield. When you are taking a snowfield, make sure that you don't go over thin ice when you hear a stream below. I believe last year a woman did die because she fell through some thin ice and she was swept underneath the current in the wintertime. Always make sure you're using the right equipment. If you just bought an ice axe or crampons, make sure this isn't your first time using them. This is not the time and place to be experimenting with those things. If you did just get some trail crampons, then you want to make sure you try them on beforehand. These are pretty intuitive to use, but make sure you know the difference when to use trail crampons and when to use real crampons. If you follow the Whitney forum, they will be able to tell you what to use and what not to use. Another great reference is the park itself and other hikers coming down. Another important thing to keep in mind is know when to get off the snowfield. When we were hiking, there was a gentleman who went too far down and ended up on the other side of the stream. And a park ranger actually had to go across and rescue him, bring him back. So that actually leads into my next point, which is don't leave your group. That gentleman who took the snowfield too far down actually got separated from his son. His son ended up going all the way down to Whitney Portal while he was stuck on the other side of the stream. Make sure you don't leave your group. And finally, the most important thing is know when to call quits. The first time I went with a friend, and by the time we got to trail camp, she got very sick. She told me to keep going, but I could tell that she was not going to do well. So I decided that it was best if we both went down together rather than split up as a group. It's better to leave now, stay safe, come back another time, then stay on that mountain forever.
So while you're preparing for this hike, you're also going to want to know the basic layout of the route you're taking. First, before even heading to the trailhead, you might want to stay at Lone Pine, which is about 3,000 feet in elevation the night before. At Whitney Portal, which is about 8,300 feet in elevation, you'll see these wooden arches that designate the beginning of the trail. Your first trail marker will be a stream crossing at the North Fork Creek. This can be pretty deep, and if you want to keep your feet dry, you're going to want to use your hiking poles to keep your balance, and make sure you have good waterproof boots. More on the gear later. Eventually, you'll reach a set of log crossings that are going across the Lone Pine Creek, and this will lead you to the Lone Pine Campground, which is a really beautiful campsite with a nice little blue lake there, and you can camp here if you choose to do so. Beyond this, you'll keep hiking along the trail until you encounter a big open meadow. A few stream crossings later, and you'll be at Outpost Campground. This is a really nice campsite, big and open, with lots of towering pine trees, and a good place to stay. Just beyond that, after hiking through some brushy willows and going uphill some more, you'll find Mirror Lake, and once you pass that, you'll start to go uphill above the tree line. You'll notice the trees thinning out and the rocks becoming more and more bare. You'll continue on this bare rocky trail for quite a while, and another option is to take the snow. We actually had to do this because the main trail had a dangerous portion up ahead where you had to jump over onto a snowfield. Now once you hike up all of this, you'll start seeing a lot more snow, it'll get colder, and you'll reach Consultation Lake. Not far from Consultation Lake is the trail camp. Now this is a campground a lot of people stay at before summiting the mountain. It is really barren, really open. The sun's gonna bear down on you really harshly, so make sure you've got sunscreen. But there is also plenty of water sources that you can use to filter and drink water. Now connected to trail camp is the beginning of the 99 switchbacks. As you can imagine, this is a pretty grueling hike. Depending on the conditions and the time of year, you might want to opt for the snow chute. In fact, you might have to, because the trail might be covered in snow. Now even if you are able to take the switchbacks, there are some portions that will be snowy, and in this case you'll want to don those micro spikes and use those poles again. Finally, you'll hit the trail crest where you're at the top of the ridge of the mountains. It'll be really beautiful, and a little bit further is the John Muir Trail Junction. From here, it's a pretty long hike across rough, bouldery sort of trails. It's still a little bit uphill, and you're gonna want to keep an eye out on the trail and on your footing, but it is also a really beautiful scenic area. Finally, you'll reach the summit of Whitney. You'll see a shack, you'll know you're there. Take a moment to rest, enjoy the view, pat yourself on the back for your accomplishment, and then get ready to do it all in reverse. When you finally get back to Whitney Portal, you can go to the Portal store and eat some huge burgers and pancakes and drink some well-deserved beer.
I mentioned this earlier, but when it comes to the conditions of the trail, you have three great resources. The first is the actual Park Service. They provide great updates. You can call them and you can get the latest information they have to offer. The second source is the internet. I mentioned Whitney's Zone forums. They're a great resource. They have fantastic trail reports, especially when hikers are more frequently going on that mountain. And the third is something you can really only do when you're on the mountain, is ask the hikers themselves. Did you make it to the top? What's the conditions like? Which route did you take? After you get past trail camp, depending on how bad the winter is, you might have to make some adjustments to your route. If the snow is too bad, snow will actually cover this part of the 99 switchbacks called the cables. So that means your alternative is going to be the chute. Now, the chute is this patch of snow that goes all the way to trail crest. It is about 1,000 feet elevation gain, and you have to do some mountaineering there. The chute should never be your first pick unless it's the only option. When you go down, you have to make sure you understand how to self-arrest. This is where some serious injuries can take place, lacerations, broken bones. I can't stress this enough. If you're going to take the chute, make sure you have the correct experience, the correct equipment, and only do it if it's absolutely necessary.
Next, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, the gear. And before I get into this, let me just say that you should make sure you have all the essential items you need to make sure that if you get into a survival or emergency situation, you can make it out alive. So this includes things like your fire starter, your knife, your headlamp or some other way of lighting up the dark, a way to filter or purify water and also drink it, shelter and insulation, a compass or some way to navigate, and maybe some cord. You might also want to consider bringing one of these emergency GPS devices that can send a SOS signal out to a satellite. Now, as for gear that's focused on the Whitney hike, first I'm going to start off with the clothes that I wore on my body. So first I had a synthetic hiking t-shirt, some good water-resistant hiking pants, some performance boxer briefs, and finally, wool socks. Now you don't need these items exactly as they are, but what you'll notice is that they're all lightweight materials that also wick away moisture and dry fairly easily if they get wet. And that's really what you're looking for on this sort of hike. Now of course, if you're hiking up a mountain, the weather's going to vary quite a bit, and this depends on the time of day, how high in altitude you are, how rigorous your hiking is, and also just whatever weather pattern the mountain wants to throw at you. So for extra clothes, I first have some sort of outer shell. Now this is something that's rainproof in case of inclement weather, but it also helps break the wind in a chilly situation. Next, I also have a down jacket, which is really lightweight but also really warm, and it packs down to almost nothing. I usually use this when I was sleeping at night, but it's also really useful for that last portion of the hike when you're going up the 99 switchbacks and getting to the top. Next, I have some base layer clothes, including pants and a long sleeve shirt. I put this on underneath everything else when I'm sleeping. I also bring an extra pair of underwear just in case, and a couple pairs of extra socks. Now how many pairs of extra socks you bring will depend on how long you're going to stretch your hike over. I generally like to have an extra pair of socks for each night, but you can also get away with just bringing 2 pairs, one for the day that you're okay with getting wet, and one for the night that you keep dry so your feet will be warm. I should note that I like to pack my stuff really efficiently. You can do this by rolling things up with your socks inside and then stretching the socks over your clothes. And I store this in what I call a unisock, which is basically a stuff sack, but it's also a good way to keep your feet warm at night. You just put this hat over your feet and close the drawstring. So next we'll talk about the rest of the gear that'll go in your pack. I should start out by saying that I brought a 40-liter trail pack that I usually just use for day hikes or just traveling around outside of the wilderness. The reason was because this was a lot lighter than my usual pack, which is 85 liters, and it shaved at least 2 pounds off of it. I would really recommend maybe somewhere around a 50 or 60 liter pack for a Whitney. It's something that would still be pretty light, pretty easy to carry, but still have enough space for all the things you need. So the first thing is a sleeping bag, and I would recommend something that's at least rated to 20 degrees because it can get pretty chilly at nights, especially when you're higher up in altitude. Next, I would definitely recommend bringing an air mat. It's gonna pack down really nice, but it's also gonna provide comfort, which you'll need because most of the campgrounds you're sleeping on bare, sort of rough rock. Also in my pack, I've got my outer shell that I mentioned before, and I want this somewhere where I can access it pretty easily because I'm going to be putting it on and taking it off a lot during the trail. And then I've also got the rest of my clothes. The down jacket I put in here, but sometimes you might want to leave that out as you get higher in altitude. Next, I've got food and snacks, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. I've also got my first aid kit with all the essential items like bandages, antiseptic cream, etc. And I also have a 3-liter water bladder, and I would really recommend this size of water bladder because it's going to give you a lot of water all at once, but it's also not going to take up too much space. I should mention that someone else also carried a water filter. I didn't have it in my pack, but with a 50-liter pack, you could easily put that in there. Now, in addition to all this, I also strapped a tent to the bottom of my bag, and I also brought hiking poles, which are pretty essential for this trail. A lot of backpacks have a way to attach them to the back when you're not using them, but if you're not filming the trip, you'll pretty much have them out all the time. And it's even better if you have these little baskets on the bottom of them, because that'll help a lot with the snow, but we actually did okay without them. I also had micro spikes that I hooked onto the outside of my pack with a carabiner. They're pretty lightweight, they don't take up much room. And finally, of course, a headlamp, which I kept in the top of my bag. And you're definitely going to want to bring one of these. No matter how long of a period you're stretching your trip over, there's likely going to be a point where you're hiking at night. So that's all the stuff I had in my pack, but there's still some extra notes about gear I should mention. Again, waterproof boots are going to be really important because there are a lot of stream crossings and even sections of the trail where you're hiking in the stream basically. Next, I want to talk about down versus synthetic materials. Down is a great material and it's going to be really useful on this trip. We had down jackets and they packed down really small, they were really lightweight, but they were super warm at night. And also, at the time I had a synthetic 20-degree bag, but when you compare it to my new down bag, which is actually rated for 0 degrees Fahrenheit, the down bag packs down to way smaller, which would have been really useful at the time. Also, the down bag weighs 3 pounds 1 ounce, while the synthetic bag weighs 3 pounds 14 ounces. So you're almost shaving off an entire pound of weight and also getting a warmer sleeping bag. We already talked pretty extensively about clothes, but I want to reiterate that you want layers of clothes and you want to be able to pull them out of your pack as you're hiking up and down because conditions are going to change. You're going to get really hot as you hike. Time of day and altitude will affect it. You should also bring some sort of medicine for altitude sickness. Things like Dramamine, Motrin, Tylenol, ibuprofen, stuff like that is really going to help. During our trip, Robby got a really bad altitude headache right when we were about to summit. And he was actually worried he wasn't going to be able to make it, but he took some medicine and felt a lot better. But we did see a lot of hikers who had to turn around because of altitude sickness. You're also going to want sunscreen and chapstick. Once you get above the tree line, there's not going to be a lot of shade, especially at trail camp. And you'll be surprised at just how much the sun drains you of energy. A lot of times it might feel cool, but the sun's still going to be burning you. It's also a really dry environment. So for food, at the time we had a lot of dehydrated meals that we bought, and we reheated them in some water over a stove. Now you can also make your own, or you could also get away even with bringing food that you don't even have to cook if you want to go really lightweight and opt out of the stove. For snacks, it's a good idea to bring things that are really calorie rich. So for example, nuts, just a small handful of that packs a lot of calories, so you're getting lots of energy for less amount of space and weight. Now, of course, if you're eating, that's all going to have to come out somewhere. And this is where a lot of people who are really enthusiastic about climbing Whitney start to hesitate a little. Because on Mt. Whitney, what you have to do is poop in a bag. Now, this bag is called a Wag Bag, and the reason for this is because in most places there's a very thin layer of soil, if any soil at all. And once you get above the tree line, you're pretty much just hiking on granite. Now, obviously, if people were just pooping all over the place, there'd be no soil or microbes to biodegrade that, and it would just end up washing up into the water that people drink from. Now, I know it sounds inconvenient, but really it's not that bad. The bag is really big, so it's really hard to miss. The bag itself also comes with an additional Ziploc bag so that it's double layered, but we actually triple layered it with another bag. But I should note that sometimes the smell did seep through when the sun was really hot and shining on us. Now, inside each bag, there's sand that basically absorbs liquid, so it sort of helps clean up any sort of messes. But I should note that if you're gonna use your Wag Bag, make sure that you pee outside first, because you don't want to be peeing into the bag while you're also pooping, because that's just gonna add extra weight, extra mess, and make a potential leak even worse. Each bag can be used multiple times, and it's probably a good idea to use them multiple times. But I should note that they only come with enough toilet paper and wet wipes for one poop. In fact, the toilet paper that comes with it is pretty stingy and pretty thin. We kind of made the mistake of not bringing our own toilet paper or hand sanitizer and had to really ration our use. I would really recommend bringing your own toilet paper and hand sanitizer. Now again, this is a very necessary thing because so many people hike Mt. Whitney and there's only granite up there. And it's really sad and annoying because at a lot of these campsites, you'll see Wag Bags that people have just stuck into crevices or hidden behind trees. And I mean, we saw like dozens at the campsites. Make sure you carry it with you all the way back down to the trailhead so you can dispose of it properly. I mean, it's really a terrible thing to do to just poop in the bag and leave that plastic and human waste out there littering the whole area. It's one thing to leave trash that someone hikes out, but no one wants to hike out your human waste. If you leave your Wag Bag, you're kind of a terrible person and we're going to be judging you from afar. And honestly, it's really not that bad. I mean, I know that it's kind of weird and it's a squeamish thing to talk about, but I just carried mine in the outside mesh pocket of my backpack. That way it's separate from everything else. It's getting some air. I can keep an eye on it if I need to. It's really not that bad. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much everything we have to say about Mt. Whitney, but we can't stress enough that it's really important to do your own planning and your own research. So thanks for watching. If this video was helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And also, consider watching our full episode for Mt. Whitney, where we hiked the entire trail. You can see everything you can expect, and you can see all the trials and tribulations we went through ourselves.